An alien captain boarded the abandoned human warship and immediately ordered his fleet to retreat. The Corvette 3rd Vanguard Fleet moved through the dark like a slow river of metal. 42 warships, each one shaped like a curved blade, drifted in tight formation through the Vera system. Their hulls were a dull gray-green, built to absorb light instead of reflect it. From a distance, they looked like a school of fish swimming through black water. Captain Threxenvok stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Second Talon. He was tall for a Corvette, with a long neck and a narrow face covered in small dark scales. His eyes were golden and sharp. He had fought in this war for 11 years, since he was young enough to still believe that humans were simple animals who had gotten lucky with technology. He did not believe that anymore. The war between the Corvette Dominion and the human species had started over a border dispute in a system nobody cared about. Neither side remembered the exact reason anymore. What had begun as a small skirmish had grown into something much bigger, something that ate ships and crews and entire fleets like a fire eats wood. 11 years of fighting had taught the Corvette many hard lessons. The most important one was this: humans did not fight like anyone else in the galaxy. Other species that the Corvette had fought followed rules. They retreated when they were losing. They surrendered when they had no more ships left. They valued their own survival above almost everything else, and this made them predictable. You could plan around predictable enemies. You could calculate the odds and know, with confidence, how a battle would end. Humans broke all of these rules. They kept fighting, even when the numbers said they should stop. They set traps that made no logical sense until it was too late to avoid them. They sacrificed ships, crews, and sometimes entire fleets to win battles that seemed impossible to win. Corvette military instructors now taught a saying to young officers: never assume a human fleet is beaten until every human is dead, and even then, check twice. Captain Vok had learned this lesson himself, 3 years earlier, at the Battle of Corix Reach. His own brother had commanded a strike group there. The humans had been outnumbered 5-1. By every reasonable measure, the battle should have been a quick Corvette victory. Instead, the humans had lured the Corvette ships into a dense asteroid field, then detonated hidden charges that had been planted years earlier, long before the battle even began. 19 Corvette ships were destroyed in less than 10 minutes. Vok's brother was one of the dead. Vok had not trusted a beaten human fleet since that day. This was why, when the Second Talon sensors picked up something unusual in the Vera system, Vok ordered his fleet to slow down and approach with caution. The sensor officer, a younger Corvette named Ressa Duel, called out the readings from her station. "Captain, we have a large contact. Size and shape suggest a human warship, one of their heavy-class vessels. No propulsion signature, no shield signature, no weapons charge. Life support readings are almost at zero." "Almost at zero," Vok repeated. "Not zero." "Correct, Captain. There are still trace levels of power running through the hull, enough to keep a few systems alive, nothing more." Vok studied the image on the main display. The ship drifted alone against the black backdrop of space, tumbling slowly end over end like a piece of driftwood on a still lake. It was massive, nearly 2 kilometers long, with the sharp angular lines that human shipbuilders favored. Long gashes ran along one side of the hull, the kind of damage caused by heavy plasma cannons. An entire section near the rear had been torn away completely, leaving jagged metal edges exposed to the vacuum. "What happened to it?" Vok asked, mostly to himself. Ressa checked her readings again. "Captain, there is no record of any Corvette engagement in this system. According to fleet logs, no Dominion ships have entered Vera in over 4 months. Whatever did this, it wasn't us." This detail bothered Vok more than anything else on the screen. A ship this size, this heavily armed, did not simply lose a battle and drift away unnoticed. Someone had beaten this warship badly enough to gut it, and the Corvette Dominion had no record of doing it. That left only a few possibilities. Perhaps another human faction had turned on this ship in some kind of civil conflict. Perhaps a third, unknown power had attacked it. Or perhaps, and this was the possibility that made Vok's scales prickle, the humans had done this to their own ship on purpose. He dismissed that last thought quickly. No commander destroyed their own warship for no reason. That would be wasteful, even for humans. "Bring us to a stop at safe distance," Vok ordered. "Full sensor sweep of the vessel. I want to know everything about it before we decide what to do." The fleet slowed and stopped roughly 50,000 kilometers from the derelict ship. Sensor teams across all 42 vessels began scanning the wreck, searching for any sign of life, any hidden weapon system, any indication of a trap. For nearly 2 hours, the scans came back the same. No life signs. No active weapons. No shields. Just a broken, silent hulk drifting through the dark. Commander Yeth Bar, Vok's second-in-command, joined him at the display. Yeth was older than Vok, with pale scars across his throat from an old injury, and a reputation for caution that bordered on paranoia. Some officers found him annoying. Vok found him useful. A cautious voice was valuable when everyone else wanted to charge ahead. "You're thinking about boarding it," Yeth said. It wasn't a question. "The ship is a Vanguard-class heavy cruiser," Vok said. "One of their newest designs. We have never captured one intact. If there is anything left of its systems, anything at all, it could tell us more about human shipbuilding than 100 spy reports. It could also be a trap," Yeth said. "The scans show no life, no weapons, no power beyond basic systems," Vok said. "What kind of trap runs on that little energy?" Yeth did not answer right away. He looked at the image of the broken ship for a long moment. "The kind we haven't seen yet," he finally said. "Captain, you were at Korik's Reach. You know what they're capable of. This ship sits here, damaged just enough to look helpless, in a system with no record of Dominion activity. That is either bad luck, or it is bait." Vok considered this. Yeth's caution had saved the fleet before, more than once. But Vok also knew that fear could freeze a commander into inaction, and inaction cost just as many lives as recklessness. Somewhere in the galaxy, other Corvette fleets were losing ground to human forces because their commanders were too afraid to take risks. If this ship held even a fraction of the technology Vok suspected it might, bringing that knowledge home could change the balance of the entire war. "I will board it myself," Vok said. Yeth's golden eyes widened slightly. "Captain, that is not wise. Send a scouting team. There is no reason for you to risk yourself personally." "There is every reason," Vok said. "If this ship is what it appears to be, an intact human dreadnought abandoned and helpless, then whoever brings it home with real answers will be remembered. If it is a trap, then I want the most experienced officer aboard making the decisions, not a junior scout team that might miss the warning signs until it's too late." He did not say the other reason out loud, the one that mattered more than glory or duty. He wanted to see, with his own eyes, what could break a ship like this. He wanted to understand the enemy that had killed his brother, killed thousands of Corvette soldiers over 11 years, and somehow still managed to remain a mystery despite all of it. Scouting reports and sensor data could only tell him so much. He needed to walk those corridors himself. "At minimum, take a full security detachment," Yeth said, "and keep the fleet at a defensive posture the entire time you are aboard. If anything looks wrong, anything at all, I am pulling you out immediately, orders or no orders." Vok allowed himself a small, thin smile. It was the closest thing to agreement that Yeth would offer. "Agreed. Assemble a boarding team, 12 soldiers, plus myself and a technical specialist who can interface with human computer systems." Word spread through the second Talon quickly. Within the hour, 12 Corvette soldiers in heavy void armor gathered near the shuttle bay, checking their weapons and equipment with the calm, practiced movements of veterans. A technical officer named Sira Kell, small and quick with clever hands, prepared a portable data terminal, designed to interface with captured human systems. She had done this kind of work before, on smaller vessels and abandoned outposts, but never on a ship this large or this important. As the team prepared, rumors moved through the crew, as they always did before a dangerous mission. Some said the ship was a graveyard, filled with the bodies of a crew who had died fighting something terrible. Others said it was empty, the humans having evacuated before whatever destroyed it could finish the job. A few of the older soldiers, veterans who had fought humans many times before, said nothing at all. They simply checked their weapons twice instead of once, and moved a little slower, a little more carefully, than usual. Vok noticed this. He had served with some of these soldiers for years, and he trusted their instincts as much as he trusted any sensor reading. When veterans who had survived a dozen human engagements grew quiet and careful, it meant something, even if they could not put it into words. Before boarding, Vok called Ressa Dole to run one final sensor sweep. "Anything new?" he asked. No changes, Captain. Power levels remain steady at minimum. No life signs detected anywhere aboard. No weapons systems active. If I had to guess, I would say the ship has been drifting like this for weeks, maybe longer. Show me the ship's name, if the hull markings are visible. Ressa adjusted the sensors, zooming in on the ship's bow. Through the static and damage, faded lettering became visible, painted in the blocky human alphabet that Corveth translators had long since learned to read. TFS Ashen Vow, she read aloud. Terran Federation ship. The name meant nothing to Vok, not yet. He would come to know it well before this was over. The shuttle detached from the second Talon and drifted silently across the gap between the two vessels. Inside, the 12 soldiers sat in tense silence, their armored forms strapped into rows of seats, weapons resting across their laps. Sira Kell sat near the front, her data terminal clutched against her chest like a shield. Vok sat near the pilot, watching through the small viewport as the Ashen Vow grew larger and larger, filling the darkness ahead of them. Up close, the damage was even worse than the sensors had shown. Long scars ran across the hull, where weapons fire had chewed through the outer armor plating. Entire gun turrets had been sheared off, leaving twisted metal stumps where powerful cannons once stood. Near the ship's midsection, a massive hole opened into the vessel's interior, large enough for the shuttle to fly through if needed, though Vok did not want to risk that kind of entry. There, the pilot said, pointing to a smaller opening near the ship's forward section. Looks like an emergency airlock. Still has partial power, according to my readings. We can dock there. Do it, Vok ordered. The shuttle maneuvered carefully toward the airlock, thrusters firing in short controlled bursts to align with the docking port. Metal clanged against metal as the shuttle made contact, and a series of mechanical sounds echoed through the hull as the docking clamps engaged. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the airlock's outer door began to slide open, revealing a dark passage beyond, lit only by the dim red glow of emergency lighting. Vok stood and checked his sidearm one final time. Behind him, the 12 soldiers rose from their seats, weapons ready, their armored boots clanking against the shuttle's metal floor. Sira Kell followed close behind, her data terminal humming quietly as it powered on. Remember, Vok said to his team, his voice steady and calm despite the tightness he felt in his chest. We are here to gather information, nothing more. If anything looks dangerous, anything at all, we withdraw immediately. No hero's death today. Understood? A chorus of quiet acknowledgments answered him. Vok took a breath, the closest thing to a human sigh that his lungs could manage, and stepped through the airlock and into the dark, silent corridors of the TFS Ashen Vow. Behind him, back on the bridge of the second Talon, Commander Yethbar watched the boarding team's vital signs on his display, his claws tapping nervously against the edge of his console. He had a bad feeling about this ship, a feeling he could not explain with sensor readings or logical analysis. It was simply a feeling, the kind that came from years of fighting an enemy that never behaved the way it should. He hoped, for the sake of his captain and the 11 soldiers walking into that darkness with him, that his feeling was wrong. It was not. The inside of the TFS Ashen Vow smelled like burnt metal and something else, something colder, that none of the Corveth soldiers could name. Their helmets filtered most outside air for safety, but even through the filters, a faint trace of that strange smell reached them. It was not quite decay, it was something more like old smoke that had settled into the walls and never left. The corridor beyond the airlock stretched forward into darkness, lit only by strips of red emergency lighting along the floor. Every 20 meters or so, a light had failed completely, leaving small pockets of total darkness that the soldiers had to cross using their helmet lamps. Loose panels hung from the ceiling, swaying gently in the faint air currents still moving through the ship's dying life support system. Wires dangled like vines, sparking weakly every few seconds. Captain Vok walked near the front of the group, just behind 2 soldiers who kept their weapons raised and scanning the darkness ahead. Sira Kell stayed close to the center of the formation, protected on all sides, her data terminal already active, and recording everything the ship's remaining systems would allow her to access. Captain, she said quietly, I'm picking up fragments of the ship's internal network. Most of it is corrupted or offline, but there's enough left to map out the general layout. We're in a secondary corridor near the ship's forward crew section. Can you access any logs? Vok asked. Working on it. The system keeps rejecting my access requests. It's not hostile exactly. More like, the system doesn't trust outside connections anymore. I think it's running some kind of survival protocol. Vok frowned beneath his helmet. A survival protocol suggested the ship's computer core was still functioning with some level of independent decision-making, which was unusual. Most warships, human or Corvith, ran on systems that followed orders without question. A system that didn't trust outside connections sounded almost alive. They continued forward, boots echoing against the metal floor in the silence. The soldiers moved carefully around debris, stepping over fallen support beams and shattered equipment. In several places, deep scorch marks scarred the walls, the kind left by plasma weapons fired at close range. In other places, the metal itself had been torn and bent, as if something enormously strong had ripped through the corridor by brute force alone. These marks, one of the soldiers said, kneeling beside a long gouge in the floor plating. This isn't weapons fire. Something clawed through this. Vok crouched beside him, running a gloved hand along the edge of the gouge. It was deep, deeper than any blade he knew of, and the metal around it had curled outward, as if torn rather than cut. Get a scan of this, he told Sirakel. I want to know what could do this kind of damage. She scanned the mark with her terminal, frowning at the readings. Captain, I don't recognize the pattern. It doesn't match any weapon signature in our database. It could be mechanical damage from the battle, structural failure under stress, or something did this on purpose, with its hands, or claws. Nobody spoke for a moment. The soldiers glanced at each other, and Vok saw the tension rise in their postures, weapons gripped a little tighter, eyes scanning the shadows a little more carefully. Keep moving, Vok said, keeping his voice steady. We're here to gather information, not stories. Stay focused. They pressed on, deeper into the ship. The corridor eventually opened into a larger chamber, some kind of crew common area, judging by the rows of overturned tables and scattered chairs. Personal belongings lay strewn across the floor, a cracked data tablet, a torn piece of fabric that might have once been a jacket, a small metal cup that had rolled into a corner and stopped against the wall. What caught Vok's attention most was the complete absence of bodies. In 11 years of fighting humans, he had walked through the aftermath of battles many times, and there were always bodies, or at least the remains of them. Here, there was nothing. No bloodstains beyond a few faded marks near the far wall. No signs of the crew at all, beyond the belongings they had left behind. Where did they go? One of the soldiers muttered. Evacuated, most likely, Vok said, though something about the theory didn't sit right with him. Escape pods, lifeboats, standard procedure when a ship is critically damaged. Sirakel checked her terminal again. Captain, according to what I can pull from the ship's systems, all escape pods on this deck were launched. Actually, all escape pods across the entire ship were launched, according to the deployment log. Then the crew is gone, Vok said. Good, fewer complications. There's something strange about the timing, though, Sira added. The log shows all pods launched within the same 4-minute window. That's unusual. Even in an emergency evacuation, pods launch as crew reach them, over a longer period. Everyone launching at once, in the same short window, suggests what? Suggests it was planned, coordinated, not a panic evacuation, a deliberate one. Vok stood in the silent common room, turning this information over in his mind. A coordinated evacuation, all at once, on a ship that had clearly taken heavy damage, in a fight against an unknown enemy. It painted a strange picture, one that didn't match the chaos he would expect from a losing battle. They continued their sweep of the ship, moving deck by deck toward the bridge, which Sirakel's partial map suggested was still several levels above them. Along the way, they passed through more crew quarters, storage rooms, and maintenance corridors, each one telling a small piece of the same strange story. Equipment was missing in some rooms, as if deliberately removed rather than destroyed. Certain doors had been welded shut from the inside, using tools that would have taken time and effort to bring to bear, time that a ship under attack should not have had to spare. In one storage room, they found something that made even the most hardened Corveth soldiers pause. Along the far wall, someone had painted a message in thick red paint, the human letters large and clear despite the dim lighting. Sira Kell's translator software worked quickly to convert the human text. "Captain," she said, her voice quieter than before. "It says, take what you want. You'll wish you hadn't." The room fell silent, except for the soft hum of failing equipment somewhere nearby. Vok stared at the message for a long moment, his golden eyes narrowing. "A scare tactic," he said finally, though he did not sound entirely convinced by his own words. "Humans are known for this kind of thing. Psychological warfare. They want us to panic and retreat before we learn anything useful. We will not give them that satisfaction." "Captain." Yethbar's voice crackled through the comm channel, patched through from the second Talon. "I heard that translation. I strongly recommend you reconsider this mission." "Noted, Commander," Vok replied. "We continue." He gave the order to move forward, and the team pressed on, though the mood among the soldiers had shifted noticeably. Where before they had moved with the disciplined confidence of veterans, now there was a new tension in their steps, a wariness that no amount of training could fully suppress. Every shadow seemed to hide something. Every creak of the dying ship's metal frame made hands tighten around weapons. They reached a stairwell that led upward toward the bridge, its metal steps littered with debris and, oddly, dozens of small spent shell casings, the kind used in human sidearms, rather than the heavier plasma weapons typically mounted on warships. Vok picked one up, turning it over in his gloved fingers. "Someone fought here," he said. "Not against enemy ships. Hand to hand, or close quarters at least." "Against what, though?" one of the soldiers asked. "There's no sign of an enemy boarding force. No alien biological traces, no foreign equipment. Just human shell casings, human blood, and these claw marks we can't identify." It was a question none of them could answer, and it hung in the recycled air of the stairwell like a bad omen. As they climbed, Sira Kell's terminal chirped softly. "Captain, I've gained partial access to the ship's secondary logs. Not the command logs, those are locked behind something I can't crack yet, but personal logs from crew members. Do you want me to pull them?" Vok considered this. Personal logs might contain useful intelligence about crew morale, command structure, even technical details about the ship's systems, information that psychological profiles of human soldiers always found valuable. But there was also a risk. Personal logs could contain traps, corrupted data designed to damage their equipment, or worse. "Pull them," he decided, carefully. "Isolate your terminal from any other systems before you access anything." Sira nodded and set to work, her fingers moving quickly across the small holographic interface projected above her terminal. It took several minutes, but eventually, a log began to play, the voice rough with static but clear enough to understand once the translator software processed it. The voice belonged to a young human, judging by its tone, a crew member logging what sounded like a routine update, recorded weeks before whatever battle had crippled this ship. The recording spoke of ordinary things, a supply shortage in the mess hall, a training exercise that had gone poorly, complaints about a superior officer who was too strict about uniform regulations. Small, human, unremarkable things. Vok listened in silence, and something about it unsettled him more than the claw marks or the painted warning ever could. These were not the words of monsters or fanatics. They were the words of an ordinary person, living an ordinary life aboard a warship, worrying about small things because the big things, the war, the danger, the possibility of death, had become so routine that they barely registered anymore. "Play another," he said quietly. Sira found a second log, this one recorded more recently, judging by the background noise, which included the distant sound of alarms and the ship's internal systems calling out warnings in the background. This voice belonged to someone older, more tired, the words clipped and urgent. "Don't know how much time we have left. Command's orders came through an hour ago. Everyone not on essential duty reports to evac stations by 0400. They're not telling us why, but I've got a bad feeling about it. Captain Cross hasn't left the bridge in 2 days. If something happens to me, tell my sister I." The recording cut off abruptly, the log ending mid-sentence. Nobody spoke for a long moment. "Captain Cross," Vok repeated slowly. "The ship's commander." "Must be," Sira said. "I'll see if I can find more logs referencing her directly." If she made command decisions in the final hours, understanding her mindset could tell us exactly what happened here. Vok nodded, though a cold, uneasy feeling had settled into his chest, one that had nothing to do with the ship's failing temperature controls. Something about that recording, the tired urgency in the voice, the mention of a captain who had not left the bridge in 2 days, the abrupt evacuation order given for reasons nobody explained, told him this was not simply a ship that had lost a battle and been abandoned. Something had happened here, something planned, and whatever it was, Captain Elena Cross was at the center of it. They reached the top of the stairwell, where a heavy blast door stood between them and the bridge, its surface scorched black and dented from some past impact. A single word had been carved into the metal, crude and jagged, as if scratched by hand rather than cut with a proper tool. Syrah's translator processed it a moment later. "Captain?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It says sorry." Vox stared at the word for a long time, before finally reaching out and placing his hand against the cold metal of the door. "Open it," he said. The blast door groaned as its hydraulics fought against years of damage and low power. It opened slowly, one painful inch at a time, until the gap was wide enough for the soldiers to slip through. Beyond it lay the bridge of the TFS Ashen Vow, dark, except for a handful of still-functioning console lights that blinked weakly in the gloom, like the last embers of a dying fire. Vox stepped through first, his boots crunching over broken glass and scattered debris. The bridge was larger than he expected, a wide semicircular room with rows of control stations facing a massive central view screen, now cracked and dark. Chairs sat empty at every station, some overturned, others perfectly in place, as if their occupants had simply stood up and walked away in the middle of a normal shift. At the center of the room, on a raised platform, stood the captain's chair. Unlike the others, it faced forward, toward the dead view screen, and it was the only chair in the room that showed no sign of the chaos around it. No debris rested on its seat. No damage marked its frame. It looked, oddly, cared for, as if someone had made a point of keeping this one thing intact. "Command chair is untouched," one of the soldiers noted, scanning the area with his weapon raised. "Everything else in this room is a wreck, but that chair looks brand new." Vox approached it slowly, his instincts telling him to be cautious, even though the chair showed no obvious threat. He circled it once, studying every angle, before finally reaching out and running a hand along its armrest. Cool metal, slightly worn from years of use, nothing more. "Syrah," he said, "can you access the command console from here?" She moved up beside him, connecting her terminal to a data port built into the side of the chair. Lights flickered across her small holographic display as she worked, her brow furrowed in concentration beneath her helmet. "I'm in," she said after several tense minutes. "Command logs are unlocking. Captain, this is going to take some time to fully process. There's a lot here. Should I start with the most recent entries?" "Yes, play them." A soft chime sounded from the console, and then a woman's voice filled the bridge, tired but steady, carrying the particular calm of someone who had made peace with a difficult decision. The translator software smoothed her words into the Corvith tongue, though something in the tone still came through, a kind of weight that no translation could fully erase. "Captain's log, final entry. This is Captain Elena Cross, TFS Ashen Vow. If anyone is hearing this who isn't human, I want you to know something before you go any further into my ship." The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. Vox held up a hand for silence, and the recording continued. 3 days ago, we engaged an enemy scouting force in this system. We won that fight, but during the engagement we picked up something else, something that wasn't Corvith, and wasn't anything in our database either. It came from deep in the outer system, drawn in by the weapons fire, I think. By the time we realized what we were dealing with, it had already boarded us. Vox's grip tightened on the edge of the command chair. This confirmed what the claw marks and torn metal had suggested, something else, some third party, unknown to both the Corvith Dominion and apparently to humanity as well, had attacked this ship. "I'm not going to pretend we won that fight either," Cross continued. "We didn't. We lost people, good people, faster than I've ever lost a crew in 15 years of service. Whatever that thing was, it didn't behave like anything organic. It moved through the ship like smoke, killed without sound, and left almost nothing behind. By the time we sealed it into the aft cargo section, we'd lost over 200 souls." A long pause followed, filled only with the faint hum of static. "I made the call to evacuate the crew, All of them. Every escape pod, launched together, timed so that thing couldn't follow any single pod and pick off survivors one at a time. I stayed behind with a skeleton crew of volunteers, people who chose to stay because they understood what needed to happen next. We sealed every deck between the bridge and the aft section, rigged what defenses we could, and made sure that thing couldn't get off this ship alive. Neither could we by the end, but we made sure of it. Vok's chest felt tight. He glanced at his soldiers and saw the same growing unease reflected in their postures, the same slow realization that this was not the story they had expected to find. If you're Corveth, and you're hearing this, listen carefully, Cross's voice said, and for the first time, something sharper entered her tone, something close to a warning. We didn't manage to kill it. We contained it. Sealed it into the aft cargo hold behind 3 blast doors, and every scrap of reinforced plating we could weld into place in the time we had. It's still in there. It's been in there for weeks now, with no food, no way out, and from what our sensors could tell before they failed, it doesn't need either of those things the way we do. Sirakel had gone very still beside her terminal. Vok felt a cold weight settle in his stomach, a feeling he hadn't experienced since Korik's reach. We don't know what wakes it up. We don't know what draws it. All we know is that it came here following weapons fire and battle damage, and it killed 200 of my people in under 6 hours. I'm leaving this ship as a warning, and, honestly, a kind of tomb. If you're salvaging it for parts, if you're looking for our technology, our weapons, anything at all, I'm asking you, sailor to sailor, enemy to enemy, don't. Turn around, take your people and leave this system. Whatever is behind those aft doors, it isn't worth whatever you think you're going to find. The recording paused again, and when Cross's voice returned, it had softened, taken on something almost gentle. My crew evacuated to a rendezvous point 4, light years from here. Command knows what happened. They'll send a proper cleanup team eventually, someone equipped to deal with this the right way, with containment specialists and the tools we didn't have out here on the edge of nowhere. Until then, this ship stays sealed, and stays abandoned, and stays exactly what it looks like, a grave. I'd ask you to respect that, but I know that's probably too much to hope for from anyone willing to board a derelict warship in enemy territory. So instead, I'll just say this. Her voice grew quiet, almost a whisper. Whatever you find behind those doors, you brought it on yourself. We tried to warn you. Godspeed, whoever you are. I hope you listened better than we did, back when this all started. The recording ended with a soft click, and silence fell over the bridge once more, broken only by the faint hum of dying systems and the sound of 12 Corveth soldiers breathing hard inside their helmets. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Captain, Sirakel finally said, her voice trembling slightly despite her training. The command log shows the aft cargo section is 3 decks below us, and toward the rear of the ship. According to the ship's remaining structural sensors, all 3 blast doors mentioned in the recording are still sealed and holding. Still holding, Vok repeated. For now. He turned to look at his soldiers, all of them standing frozen, weapons still raised, but eyes wide behind their visors, clearly processing the same horrifying possibility that had already taken root in his own mind. If Captain Cross's account was true, and every piece of evidence they had found so far seemed to confirm it, then somewhere below their feet, sealed behind aging doors that had been holding for weeks without any maintenance or reinforcement, something waited. Something that had killed 200 trained human soldiers in a matter of hours. Something that fed on combat, or violence, or weapons fire, drawn to this ship by the very battle that had crippled it. And they had brought an entire shuttle, 12 armed soldiers, and a fleet of 42 warships sitting just outside, all radiating the kind of energy signatures and weapons readiness that might, for all they knew, act like a dinner bell. Commander Yeth, Vok said into his comm channel, his voice tighter than he intended. Are you receiving this transmission? Static answered him for a moment, before Yeth's voice came through, grim and steady. We're receiving it, Captain, every word. Recommendations? My recommendation was made before you boarded that ship, Yeth said. But since you're asking now, I'd say get your team out of there immediately. That recording is either the truth, in which case you're standing on top of something that killed 200 trained soldiers, or it's an elaborate piece of misdirection, meant to scare us off from something else entirely. Either way, staying put serves no purpose. Vok knew Yeth was right. Every instinct honed over 11 years of war told him the same thing, and yet, some stubborn part of him, the part that had pushed him to board this ship in the first place, wanted answers, wanted to know, with certainty, whether this was truth or trick. "Sira," he said, "can you access any sensor data from the aft section? Anything at all that might confirm what's actually behind those doors?" She worked quickly, her fingers flying across her holographic display, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cold air of the dying ship. "Captain, there's something. A partial sensor log. Damaged. But I can pull fragments. It's dated to right before the final evacuation." "Play it." What came through wasn't words. It was raw sensor data, converted into a garbled audio representation, the kind used by technical systems to alert crew to anomalies, too complex for simple alarms. And beneath the static and distortion, faint but unmistakable, came a sound that made every soldier in that room go rigid with primal, wordless fear. It was a scraping sound, slow and deliberate, like claws dragging across metal from the inside of a sealed door. And underneath it, so faint it might have been imagination, something that might have been breathing, or something that might have been laughing. "Turn it off," Vok said quietly. "Turn it off now." Sira cut the audio immediately, her hands shaking as she disconnected her terminal from the command console. The bridge fell silent again, but the silence felt different now, heavier, filled with the awareness that they were not alone on this ship, not truly, no matter what the sensors had claimed when they first arrived. Vok looked at his soldiers, at the fear plainly visible in their eyes despite years of training and discipline, and made a decision that would define the rest of this mission, and perhaps the rest of the war itself. "We're leaving," he said. "Now. Everyone, back to the shuttle, quickly and quietly. No unnecessary noise, no weapons fire unless absolutely necessary. Move." The soldiers moved fast, but not so fast that discipline broke down into panic. Years of training held even as fear gripped every one of them, and they fell into a tight formation around Vok and Sira Kell, weapons raised, eyes scanning every shadow as they retraced their path back toward the airlock and the waiting shuttle. They had made it barely 50 meters from the bridge when the ship shuddered. It was not a large tremor, nothing that would register as dangerous on its own, but on a ship that had been drifting silent and lifeless for weeks, any movement at all was cause for alarm. Vok froze, one hand raised to halt his soldiers, and listened. For a moment, there was nothing but the soft hum of failing systems and the ragged breathing of 11 soldiers trying to control their fear. Then it came again, stronger this time, a deep groan of metal stress that echoed up through the deck plating beneath their boots. "Report," Vok snapped into his comm channel. "Captain, we're picking up a power fluctuation from the aft section." Residul's voice came back from the second Talon, tight with tension. "Something down there just drew a significant amount of energy, more than the ship should have available to give. We don't have a clear read on the source." "The blast doors," Sira Kell said, her voice barely steady. "Captain, if something's drawing power near the aft cargo hold, and those doors have been running on minimal maintenance for weeks." She didn't need to finish the thought. Everyone understood. "Move," Vok ordered, and this time there was no attempt to stay quiet. Full speed to the shuttle, now. The soldiers broke into a run, boots pounding against the metal decking, the sound echoing through the dark corridors of the dead ship in a way that felt, to every one of them, like an invitation. Vok ran near the back of the group, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds, half expecting to see something emerge from the darkness behind them. They reached the stairwell and descended 2 levels in a controlled but hurried scramble, boots clanging against metal steps, weapons still gripped tight in case anything appeared in the shadows ahead. The ship shuddered again, harder this time, and somewhere far below them, a sound rolled through the hull like distant thunder, a deep metallic groan followed by something that might have been a scream, if metal could scream. "Captain," Sira called out, checking her terminal as they ran. Sensor data from the aft section just spiked, and then went completely dark. "All 3 blast doors are showing structural failure warnings." Vok's blood ran cold, though he kept moving, kept his voice steady for the sake of his soldiers. "Time estimate before failure? I don't know. The system doesn't have enough historical data to make a reliable prediction. Could be minutes, could already be too late." They reached the airlock corridor, The same dim, red-lit passage they had walked through what felt like hours ago but had actually been less than 2 hours before. The shuttle waited exactly where they had left it, docked and sealed, its pilot undoubtedly watching sensor readings with growing alarm. "Get the airlock open," Vok ordered, and one of the soldiers moved ahead to the control panel, keying in the sequence with fingers that trembled just slightly, despite years of combat experience. The outer door hissed and began to slide open, revealing the shuttle's boarding ramp beyond. Soldiers filed through quickly, weapons still raised, eyes still scanning the darkness behind them even as they moved toward safety. Vok waited until every soldier had passed through before following, Sirakel close behind him, her data terminal still clutched tight against her chest. As the last soldier boarded the shuttle, the ship shuddered violently, throwing several of them off balance. Somewhere deep in the vessel's dying structure, metal tore with a sound like a giant scream, and the emergency lighting throughout the corridor flickered and died, plunging everything into total darkness for one terrifying moment before the helmet lamps cut through the black. "Go, go, go!" Vok shouted, practically shoving Sira through the airlock ahead of him before scrambling through himself. The outer door sealed behind them with a hiss of escaping air, and the shuttle's engines roared to life almost immediately, the pilot clearly not waiting for formal orders before beginning undocking procedures. "Undocking now," the pilot called back, voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Everyone strap in. This is going to be rough." The shuttle broke free from the airlock, with a lurch that threw everyone against their restraints, thrusters firing at maximum burn, to put distance between them and the dying warship as quickly as possible. Through the small viewport, Vok watched the TFS Ashen Vow grow smaller behind them, its damaged hull illuminated by the fading light of a dozen internal explosions, now visible along its length, small fires burning briefly in the vacuum, before starving for oxygen and dying out. "Second Talon, this is the boarding shuttle," the pilot called over the comm. "We are clear of the derelict and returning at maximum speed, requesting immediate recovery." "Copy that, shuttle," Ressa Dull's voice answered, tense but professional. "Bringing you in now. Captain Vok, Commander Yeth wants to speak with you the moment you're aboard." Vok closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the adrenaline slowly begin to drain from his body, replaced by an exhaustion that went bone deep. He thought about Captain Elena Cross's recording, about her warning, about the 200 souls she said had died in less than 6 hours, against whatever waited behind those aft doors. He thought about the sound they had heard, the scraping, and the breathing, and the thing that might have been laughter. And he thought about his fleet, 42 ships sitting just outside the Vera system's edge, radiating exactly the kind of energy and weapons readiness that seemed, based on everything they had learned, to be precisely what drew that creature to this ship in the first place. The shuttle docked with the second Talon less than 10 minutes later, and Vok moved quickly through the ship's corridors toward the bridge, still in his boarding armor, Sirakel hurrying to keep pace beside him with her data terminal. Commander Yeth Bar met him just outside the bridge entrance, his expression grim. "I heard everything over the open channel," he said without preamble. "The recording, the sensor data, all of it. Captain, we need to leave this system, now." "I agree," Vok said, and the simplicity of his own agreement surprised even him. 11 years of pride and ambition, of wanting to be the officer who brought home the technology that would turn the tide of the war, and none of it mattered anymore, not against what he had just witnessed. "Get me the fleet-wide channel." Yeth nodded and led him onto the bridge, where the wide view screen still showed the distant, dying shape of the Ashen Vow, small flickers of light still visible along its length, as internal systems continued to fail. Ressa Dull stood at her station, glancing nervously between her sensors and the captain. "Captain," she said, "I need to report something. In the last 3 minutes, we've detected a new heat signature emerging from the derelict's aft section. It's moving. Slowly, but it's moving toward the hull breach." Vok stared at the screen, at the small red indicator blinking near the rear of the ancient warship, and felt every instinct in his body scream at him to run. "Fleet-wide channel," he said again, more urgently this time. "Now." Yeth activated the comm system, and a moment later, Vok's voice carried across all 42 ships of the 3rd Vanguard Fleet, steady, despite the fear coiled tight in his chest. "This is Captain Threxen Vok, commanding officer of the 2nd Talon, and ranking officer of the 3rd Vanguard Fleet. All ships are to begin immediate withdrawal from the Vera system. I repeat, all ships withdraw immediately. This is not a drill, and this is not a tactical retreat from enemy engagement. Set course away from this system, at maximum sustainable speed, and do not stop until you receive further orders. Confused chatter began filling the secondary channels almost immediately, officers across the fleet questioning the order, some outright refusing to believe it without more explanation. Vok understood their confusion. To them, the mission had looked simple. Investigate a derelict human warship, gather intelligence, return home. No enemy fleet had engaged them. No weapons fire had been exchanged. From the outside, there was no visible reason for a full fleet retreat. Captain, one ship commander's voice cut through the chatter, skeptical and sharp. With respect, we have 42 warships here. Whatever damaged that human vessel, we can handle it. Running from an unknown threat without even identifying it seems. That is precisely why we are running. Vok cut him off, his voice hard now, carrying the full weight of command authority. We do not know what that thing is. We know it killed 200 trained human soldiers in under 6 hours, aboard a fully armed warship with functioning weapons and shields. We know it is drawn to combat, to weapons fire, to exactly the kind of energy signature that 42 warships sitting in formation produces continuously. And we know that whatever contained it for the past several weeks has just failed. Silence answered him across the channel, the kind of silence that came from officers finally understanding the gravity of the situation. I am not asking for a debate, Vok continued. I am giving an order, as ranking officer of this fleet, backed by direct evidence gathered during a personal boarding mission. We withdraw. All ships, immediate maximum speed retreat, heading away from Vera system on my mark. He looked at Resadul's display one final time, at the small red indicator that marked the creature's slow, deliberate movement through the wreckage of the Ashen Vow, moving steadily toward the breach in the hull that led out into open space, toward 42 warships full of exactly the kind of prey it seemed to hunt. Mark, Vok said quietly. Across the fleet, engines flared to life, as 42 Corvette warships began their retreat, turning away from the Vera system and the dying human warship at its center, and from whatever now stirred within its broken hull, hungry and awake after weeks of silence, drawn by the scent of battle and the promise of more. The third Vanguard fleet ran. There was no elegant word for it, no way to dress it up in the language of tactical withdrawal or strategic repositioning. 42 Corvette warships fled the Vera system at maximum sustainable speed, engines burning hotter than fleet regulations technically allowed. Every captain aboard, driven by the same cold fear that had gripped Threxin Vok the moment he heard that scraping sound behind the sealed aft doors of the TFS Ashen Vow. Vok stood on the bridge of the second Talon, watching the tactical display as his fleet's icons moved steadily away from the marker that represented the derelict human ship. Behind him, Commander Yeth Bar kept a close watch on the sensor readings, his claws drumming an anxious rhythm against the edge of his console. Report, Vok said, not taking his eyes off the display. The creature, or whatever it is, breached the hull approximately 4 minutes ago, Resadul said from her station, her voice tight with controlled fear. It's currently drifting, not pursuing, as far as I can tell. It doesn't appear to have propulsion of its own, at least not any kind our sensors can detect. Then how did it move through the ship? Yeth asked. I don't know, Commander. I don't know what it is, how it moves, or what it wants. All I know is what the sensors are telling me, and right now, they're telling me it's just floating there, near the wreck. Vok allowed himself a small measure of relief, though he did not let his guard down. Captain Cross's warning still echoed in his mind, her tired, steady voice, describing something that had killed 200 trained soldiers in under 6 hours. A creature that did not need propulsion to be dangerous, was not a creature to underestimate, simply because it wasn't chasing them at that particular moment. Continue monitoring, he ordered. Full sensor sweep, maximum range, until we're well clear of the system. I want to know the moment anything changes. The fleet continued its retreat for the better part of an hour, every officer and soldier aboard all 42 ships, tense and watchful, half expecting some new horror to emerge from the Vera system behind them. But nothing came. The creature, whatever it truly was, remained near the wreck of the Ashen Vow, and slowly, ship by ship, The third Vanguard fleet began to breathe a little easier as the distance grew. It was Ressa who first noticed the second set of sensor contacts, appearing at the very edge of their detection range, far behind the fleeing Corvette fleet. "Captain," she said, her voice suddenly sharp with alertness. "New contacts, multiple signatures, approaching the Vera system from the direction we came. I'm reading. Captain, these are human warship signatures, a lot of them." Vok moved quickly to her station, studying the readings himself. Dozens of new contacts, organized in tight formation, moving with the purposeful precision of a prepared fleet rather than a scattered or panicked one. How many ships? Best estimate, 60 or more. Possibly a full battle fleet, Captain. Yeth's scarred throat tightened visibly as he processed this information. "They knew," he said slowly. "This whole time. Captain Cross's evacuation, the warning message, all of it. This wasn't just about scaring off looters. It was about buying time." Vok stared at the display, watching the human fleet's icons converge on the Vera system, and understood, with sudden and complete clarity, exactly what had happened. Captain Cross and her crew had not simply survived an attack and fled. They had contained a creature capable of devastating destruction, sealed it aboard their own dying ship, and then transformed that ship into something far more valuable than any weapon or piece of technology the Corvette might have hoped to salvage. They had turned it into bait. A wounded, seemingly helpless warship, drifting in a system with no record of recent Dominion activity, was exactly the kind of prize an ambitious Corvette commander might not be able to resist investigating. And while that commander's forces were drawn in, distracted by the promise of captured technology and intelligence, a proper human battle fleet had been gathering just outside sensor range, waiting for exactly this moment. "They wanted us to board it," Vok said quietly. The recording, the warning, all of it, calculated to be just frightening enough to make us cautious, but not so frightening that a determined commander would turn back before boarding. They needed us to see what was inside. They needed us to understand what we were dealing with, so that when we ran, we'd run in a panic, not in an organized retreat, Yeth finished grimly. Scattered, disorganized, easy targets for a prepared fleet to pick off. Vok looked at his own fleet's formation on the display, and felt a fresh wave of cold understanding wash over him. Though his order to retreat had been given out of genuine fear for his ships and crews, the manner of that retreat, hurried and urgent as it was, had nonetheless kept the fleet moving in a reasonably organized formation, ship by ship, rather than the chaotic scattering that pure panic might have produced. It was, perhaps, the one small advantage his years of discipline and experience had given him over whatever plan the humans had intended. "New orders, fleet-wide," Vok said, his voice steady, despite the fear still coiled in his chest. "Maintain current heading and speed. Do not break formation under any circumstances. If that human fleet gives chase, we run as one unit, covering each other, not scattering like frightened prey." The order carried across the fleet, and slowly, the Corvette ships tightened their formation, even as they continued their retreat. Wingmen falling into supporting positions, rear guard vessels adjusting to cover the fleet's flanks. It was not the chaotic, panicked scattering that the human trap had likely been designed to produce, but a disciplined, if hasty, withdrawal. The human fleet, upon reaching the edge of the Vera system and finding the Corvette Vanguard already well clear and moving in organized formation, did not immediately give chase. Instead, their icons slowed, gathering near the position where the derelict Ashen Vow still drifted, its dying systems finally giving out entirely as the last of its emergency power reserves ran dry. "They're not pursuing," Ressa reported, relief evident in her voice. "It looks like, Captain, it looks like they're focused on the wreck itself. Possibly a recovery operation, or containment of whatever emerged from the aft section." Vok watched the display for a long moment, understanding slowly settling over him. The trap had been sprung too late, or perhaps his own caution, and the discipline of his retreat, had denied the humans the easy victory they might have hoped for. Either way, the human fleet's priority now seemed to be dealing with the very threat that had driven the Corvette away in the first place. A threat of their own making, that had apparently grown too dangerous, even for them to leave unattended. "Continue our withdrawal," Vok ordered. "Full speed, until we reach the border of contested space. I want a full fleet debrief the moment we're clear. and I want every scrap of data Sirakel gathered aboard that ship transmitted to Dominion Fleet Command immediately. Hours later, once the 3rd Vanguard Fleet had crossed safely back into Dominion-controlled space and the immediate danger had passed, Vox sat alone in his quarters aboard the 2nd Talon, reviewing Sirakel's recovered data one final time. He replayed Captain Elena Cross's final recording, listening again to her tired, steady voice, her warning, her apology carved crudely into a blast door that had somehow managed to hold long enough for her message to be heard. He thought about the 200 souls she said had died protecting the rest of her crew, about the deliberate, coordinated evacuation, designed to save as many lives as possible, about a commander who had stayed behind on a dying ship, not out of recklessness or desperation, but out of calculated sacrifice, turning her own defeat into a weapon against the very enemy who might come looking for an easy victory. 11 years of war had taught Vok that humans did not fight like anyone else in the galaxy. They did not simply defend what they had. They planned for defeat as carefully as they planned for victory, turning even their losses into opportunities, their wrecked and abandoned ships into traps more dangerous than any minefield or ambush. It was not simply that humans refused to give up. It was that they refused to let a single loss be wasted, transforming every defeat into a lesson, a weapon, or a warning for whoever came next. Commander Yethbar found him there sometime later, standing quietly in the observation lounge, looking out at the stars beyond the reinforced viewport. "Fleet Command has received our report," Yeth said. "They're impressed and concerned, in roughly equal measure. There's already talk of establishing new protocols for handling derelict human vessels. No boarding without extensive remote scanning first. No fleet gathering within sensor range of any wreck until its history has been thoroughly verified." "Good," Vok said quietly. "It should have been standard procedure years ago." "For what it's worth, Captain," Yeth added, "pulling the fleet out when you did, and keeping it in formation, rather than letting it scatter. That decision likely saved every ship under your command. If we'd panicked, if we'd broken formation the moment that human fleet appeared, we would have been easy targets." Vok said nothing for a long moment, still watching the stars. "We got fortunate," he finally said. "Cross's plan was well designed. If her people had triggered that trap even an hour earlier, before our retreat had properly organized, this conversation would not be happening. 42 ships, over 10,000 lives under my command, and it came down to timing that had almost nothing to do with anything I did right. Perhaps," Yeth said, "or perhaps 11 years of hard lessons taught you to be cautious in exactly the way that mattered most, this time." Vok did not answer, but he thought again of Captain Cross's recorded voice, of her apology scratched into cold metal, of a message meant not for glory or vengeance, but simply as a warning, offered even to an enemy, in the hope that fewer lives might be lost because of it. It was a strange kind of mercy, wrapped inside a devastating trap, and Vok suspected he would spend a long time trying to understand what kind of species could hold both of those truths inside the same act. Word of the incident spread quickly through Dominion Fleet Command, and within weeks, it had become something of a legend among Corvette officers, a cautionary tale told to new recruits and veteran commanders alike. The story of the captain who boarded an abandoned human warship and immediately ordered his fleet to retreat became shorthand for a new kind of wisdom in the war against humanity. A reminder that even the humans' defeats could be more dangerous than their victories, and that no ship, however broken and lifeless it appeared, should ever be assumed truly empty. On the other side of the war, aboard a human recovery vessel, now working carefully to contain the creature that had once threatened the Ashen Vow, Captain Elena Cross's name was added to a long list of officers who had given everything to protect their crews, and, in doing so, had struck a blow against the enemy that no weapon alone could have managed. Her final message, recovered intact from the wreck's command logs, would go on to be studied by human military strategists for years afterward, not merely as a successful tactic, but as a demonstration of something the Corvette Dominion was only beginning to understand. Humanity did not need to win every battle to win the war. Sometimes, all it needed was a single, well-placed warning, an abandoned ship, and an enemy commander curious enough, or proud enough, to take the bait. Far from Vera system, safe within Dominion space, Captain Threxen Vok filed his final report on the incident, recommending sweeping changes to fleet protocol regarding derelict human vessels. It was approved without objection. In the years that followed, no Corvette commander would ever again order a boarding party onto an abandoned human warship without first confirming, beyond any doubt, that it was exactly what it appeared to be. They had learned, at great cost and even greater fortune, that with humanity, nothing ever truly was.